remaining, this is Thursday, April 13th, 2023. And this is the final hour of our work.
Someone has their mic.
Yeah, thought I turned it off.
Yep.
Yeah. It is muted.
Yes. Yes, you are muted. Okay.
Okay.
Great, back
You're
to
doing your job.
not hearing my voice coming back, which is pretty scary.
It's always
All
pleasant.
right, so again, Thursday, April 13th, 2023, it's 11 a.m. We're resuming our work on H126 and activating community resilience and biodiversity. We're joined by Mr. Fidel. Good morning, Mr. Fidel.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Jamie Fidel. I'm the Forest and Wildlife Program Director, General Counsel of Vermont Natural Resources Council. And as Mr. Mears referenced before, also worked with colleagues here, some of whom are in the room, through the Forest Partnership and providing testimony and some recommendations on their behalf. Forest Partnership is Audubon Vermont, Vermont Land Trust, Nature Conservancy Trust for Public Land, Vermont Conservation Voters, and the NRC. You have my testimony in writing, so I'm not going to read from it. I'm just going to try and hit on a couple of high levels and then maybe talk about some of the things in the bill and maybe relate to some things that have been discussed this morning. I did, though, want to take just a couple minutes to provide at a high level why we think the bill is so important and why we support the bill and the efforts in the bill with some suggested modifications. And that's recognizing sort of the awesome story told this morning about our track record in Vermont of supporting conservation and the hard work that goes into it, and the fact that we have challenges, some of which Senator White was talking about. We've got a lot of challenges towards how are we maintaining a resilient and functioning landscape. And some of that, the work that we do at the NRC is compiling information about trends statewide on the land use side of things that relate to how are we doing as far as maintaining a functional landscape, how are we doing as far as maintaining intact large forest land parcels that will meet a lot of goals of the bill over time. I don't think I need to spend time sort of talking to you about why forests are important. Your committee, the legislature over the years, has commissioned so many studies on the topics, and it's related to so many of your efforts, you know, from climate protection to disaster mitigation, protection from floods, clean water protection, habitat protection, the health of our own physical and mental well-being, not to mention, you know, they're really part of the economic engine of our state from a recreation, tourism, and forest-based manufacturing economy. The contributions there are huge. And while we're heavily forested state, 3/4 of the state forest covered by forests, it's not the whole story. A closer look, and we've been analyzing this, shows that our forests are becoming more and more fragmented below the forest cover as we do more development and residential development in the state. So we have a narrative in the state that we don't really have a lot of population growth. That's changed in recent years. We've seen spikes, and we have second homes that are being built, and we've got a housing crisis. So, you know, we have to pay attention to all of this at the same time.
We're losing, I think the figure we've heard, 12 to 15,000 acres a year for forest land.
So the Forest Service does something called Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. It's based on plots on the ground, and it's an estimate. Okay, and I know folks question whether we're really losing. It's the most available information as far as what's recent. They put out a report every year based on their plots, and the most recent report for Vermont demonstrates a suggested loss or conversion of forests of 12,469 acres. Now, look at the margin there, kind of get wrapped around the axle. Is that really what's really happening on the ground? There are other studies that are further back in time that estimate the amount of acres is less. What I can tell you is every estimate or study I've seen shows a decline. The question is how much. So we're not now where we were 100 years ago, where we're on this trajectory of having more and more forests in Vermont. We're losing our forests. The question is how much. I wanted to just quickly share with you, and what's in my testimony is that it's not the only metric you can look at we've got a project that we work on with Deb Bright where we compile the information that's available in the grand list for property tax purpose collection, but there are categories of land within that, and one of them is woodland, and that's undeveloped forest land. So there's a residential category, there's farmland, there's woodland, there's other, which is a catch-all for a number of, municipalities, utilities, and a whole catch-all category of things. What I want to show you though is what's going on in the woodland category here. Okay, so the 20% decline from 2004 to 2020 does not mean that we lost 20% of our forests. It means that a large percentage of what were considered to be undeveloped forest land parcels are now classified as residential, meaning there's a dwelling and infrastructure on that parcel, and there's likely forest land there. So I'm not trying to say that that's the reduction that we've seen. What I am showing you is and some of that land is land going into public ownership, which is good. That's a positive side of the trend. But the overwhelming majority of that decline is a shift from undeveloped forest land to residential. And as that happens over time, and then more and more residential development happens on those parcels that once were undeveloped, that's how the fragmentation happens on our landscape. It's just another metric to tell you the story of what's going on, that our woodlands there's threats, and the land use trends are not great for them. And we've got a housing crisis, and we need to figure out how to accommodate that in the best locations possible, and how do we do good planning in our forests, and how do we certainly promote more conservation efforts for willing landowners in our forests. So I'm going to toggle off of this. We've also been doing some spatial analysis in the state using the transfer tax returns. We're trying to build this this tool out statewide, but it's going to take more resources. We're only able to do it in Addison County, where we looked at spatially where the subdivisions that have been happening over the last couple of years located. And so in Addison County, from 2018 to 2021, what we found is that like roughly almost 70% of those happened in rural and agriculture and forest land and conservation areas, according to the land use designations from the Regional Planning Commission as far as the uses that are intended. And then 91% of those intersected forest blocks. So we've got this dynamic that's where a lot of our subdivisions happen, is in rural areas. We know there's a whole statewide conversation going about how do we incentivize them in the best locations possible. I'm just adding to sort of like the trend of what's happening here and why it's important to invest in a conservation planning process. So I don't want to spend a lot of time really talking, we do have, the threats, the biodiversity concerns are real. According to the 2021 Vermont Climate Assessment, 92 bird species in Vermont, including the hermit thrush, common loon, are expected to disappear from Vermont within the next 25 years. So that's climate impacts, but there's a habitat association to how our species are doing as we deal with these changes. And so maintaining a resilient and connected landscape is really important. It's also really important to meet our goals in the climate action plan. We've got trajectories right now that are because of our forest loss, outright forest loss, sequestration rates are declining for our forests. And so it's going to be hard to meet the goals in the climate action plan as we've got this forest loss situation happening at the same time because of the loss of sequestration. That's a huge contributor to meeting our greenhouse gas emission reductions. Going back to 2007, Governor Douglas's Commission on Climate Change prioritized keeping forests as forests. It was like one of the most important recommendations from a cost-benefit analysis in that previous climate action report. My testimony provides the language of the intent of why that was so important to maintain the green bank and functions of our forests. And since 2007, we've not reduced the rate of forest land conversion that was anticipated. In fact, we're consistently losing forests, so we've gone from 80% back in 2007 to 74% now. So that's where we're going. The CAP did include a recommendation to support the 30 by 30 planning effort. So biodiversity goals, climate action implementation goals, the viability of our working and recreational lands. I mean, the list just goes on of the benefits that can be achieved through this conservation planning effort. So with that as background, we support the efforts in the bill to develop a plan to advance both climate action plans goal of increasing the pace of land conservation, to meet the goals of conservation design, to employ diverse strategies to maintain a resilient landscape. We agree that the bill lays out that there's the value in our forests are in their broad uses, supporting biodiversity, community and climate resilience, as well as outdoor recreation economy, working lands. All of these are supported in the bill. It will help maintain durability to lands that contribute to our rural economy, tourism, recreation economy, and biological diversity. There was testimony in the House that showed that the overwhelming amount of our conserved lands so far in Vermont are working lands. So as we continue to build that out, that's going to be part of the trend. And then this bill offers opportunity to look at areas that also, whether they're part of the working lands or not, where they're really important ecological and biologically rich lands. So I like that there's a comprehensive approach in the bill through the categories. This is, in my mind, this is not, a certain type of land management versus another. They're sort of welcomed in this bill. We'll get to one recommendation that we have for the natural resource management conservation category.
So the working lands, does that mean that you would support including agricultural land?
Yeah, so actually, we do actually have a recommendation for that. So I could just speak to that now since we're on that topic. You'll see in this suggested change we have. So as you know, there's 3 conservation categories to try and meet through this planning effort and do our conservation efforts. The last one is
Well, that's all right. I don't want to take you off
okay.
track.
Yeah, we're just suggesting in there that as you look at what would the qualifying, conserved lands be that fit into natural resource management areas that hinges to a definition of sustainable land management, that very much should include forests, but also could include agricultural lands or grasslands, those lands that do have a benefit to biodiversity. So we are suggesting it stay tiered to biodiversity value. So ag lands that have a biodiversity value. But yeah, no, we think that that's part of, grasslands are acknowledged in Vermont conservation design as an important component. We have efforts to conserve those. That should be included in our efforts to maintain a resilient landscape. It's really important to see the bill for what it is. It's a planning process to engage a large group of stakeholders to think about the best strategies for conservation. Conservation only works in Vermont with willing landowners. So I think it's really an effort to figure out how do we meet their needs? How do we help them, right? With different conservation opportunities. We already talked about, what's the economic sort of benefit of doing this work. There was a reference to the Trust for Public Lands report, so it'd be good for you to have that. I also just wanted to let you know that Deb Brighton presented analysis to the House committee that looked at sort of what is the impact of conserving land. And we don't have a lot of time to get into this. I think you should hear from her if this is a question you'd like to know about. This was based on some recent data, though, and what she found generally as a trend in the state is that the more numbers of conserved acreage there are in a municipality, the median tax bill on a median house site was actually lower. Median tax bill for median house site on the right here generally went down the higher the number of conserved acres in a town.
Why? Yeah, I don't understand why then.
She also looked at then population, and if that had anything to do with it, then the higher the population in municipalities, there was a correlation to higher tax bills. I am not the expert on this. I just wanted to, because there was a question from Senator McCormick before, to just let you know that there's some relevant findings on this. I can't tell you this is the case in your town or the towns you're interested in. It was just a statewide trend that I just wanted to let you know is available.
So the point is more conserved land, lower tax bills. Generally. Is that, which feels like it flies in the face of logic, but I like
That's counterintuitive. Senator McDonald.
The state coffers make up the difference when on the municipal side of current use taxes. So the more you put into current use, the larger the appropriation for covering the current use side of land.
So that's part of the puzzle, right? Is we do hold towns harmless for low and current use. So I don't know if she was looking at permanent conservation or if current use should be considered as, but yes, very good point.
If you eliminated all the current use land, then the tax rate would go up.
So, just a couple other points I wanted to highlight, and then I'll wrap up. You've already acknowledged somewhere along the line that we've got all these other planning processes happening in the state. One is the Forest Future Strategic Roadmap. I'm on the advisory group there. I think this is just a really complementary effort to that, because this is looking at how to maintain the land base itself. That will then help, hopefully, in recommendations on how do we maintain forest economy. So it's a really good time to have these happening at the same time. So I think just getting to a couple of questions that have been sort of in circulation this morning. We do support the bill's intention to advance in the permanent conservation. That's an important piece of this. It's not the only part of conservation in the state. And we agree that we need to look at the entire toolbox that's needed to maintain a resilient landscape. The way that we read the bill now is there are opportunities both to have recommendations for the goals of the bill, but also goals or recommendations on how to implement Vermont conservation design, which is sort of a separate request, which could allow for a lot of diverse tools to be considered there. There's also language in the bill and the recommendations to ask for recommendations that relate to not only the goals, but how do we sort of maintain the entire sort of vision of what's outlined in the bill. That includes a lot of additional aspects of our landscape. So that's just a way of saying that we agree with we see the intent of this bill as trying to create a nod that there's more to maintaining a resilient landscape than just looking at permanent conservation. Where I'm hearing the rub is the goals, what can be included in that, and is it just permanent conservation that's included in the goals, while there's this complementary planning effort that looks at all of the other things. So we agree that, in fact, you'll see in our recommendations, we would even elevate the planning that's part of this towards the vision that's in here. There's a vision and goals, and the vision is quite broad. We would even elevate in places that the recommendations in the inventory come back with ways to maintain a resilient landscape, because that can get to the full suite of tools. So we're on board with that approach. Again, I'm underscoring what I'm hearing.
So we should.
Building evacuation, gather your belongings if they are within reach, and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area with the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety report. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach, and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area with the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety report. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach, and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area with the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety report. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach, and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area with the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety report. Your attention, please. Your attention, please. This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach, and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area with the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in for a designated area and check in with your fire and life safety for work. May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or exit. Assemble in through a designated area and check in with your fire and life and safety department. May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? This is a building evacuation. Gather your belongings if they are within reach and evacuate the building using the designated route for your area, the closest stairwell or
And I got to chat with Nancy. So nice.
The Nature Conservancy, ask them all my questions.
Oh.
Yeah.
It is better.
I am gonna have
some
sunburst.
Oh, I will definitely.
Back into this chilly room.
Yes.
You know, I read something recently.
Yeah,
Nice to get a little vitamin E.
yeah.
What do you think?
Yes,
Air
women are
conditioning?
colder, more likely.
Yeah.
And this air conditioning is.
Isn't that what you think?
It's not.
Have you heard about the math tests that have been associated with that, been correlated, where like, if you have, so girls do better on math tests in warmer temperatures and boys do worse on math tests in warmer temperatures.
Really?
And so there's a,
Wow.
yes,
Quite the study, quite the experiment.
yes,
Okay, you're all gonna do math test, we're gonna leave it at 65.
yeah.
The next math test, we're turning it up to 7. The next math test.
Yeah.
No, I used to get, when I lived in Washington DC.
So when we're ready, we do have to.
We're
We
ready.
have a quorum.
Mr. Larson, can you close the door? Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No.
We're on.
Okay, great. So it's Thursday, April 13th, 2023. It's Senate Natural Resources Energy back online. We just had a fire drill. So we had an interruption. Mr. Fidel, if you could wrap up relatively soon, then we'll go to Mr. Larson. And then Nature Conservancy has really a group of related witnesses that we would like to hear from. So we'll reschedule them so that we don't have, so that testimony comes in. And we'll hear it. All right, so back to you, Mr. Fidel.
So thank you. I'm just about done. I think where I was just kind of acknowledging that there are parts of the bill that the recommendations do allow for sort of an expansive discussion on the mix of tools that are needed. I think based on what I heard this morning, I think there's some focus on, does that happen within the context of the tools, right, for the 2050 versus meeting conservation design. So anyway, just acknowledging that as far as what I'm hearing. And then, so we have offered you some suggested language changes. I think we've already hit on it, that there could be a couple of other deserved categories for the natural resource management area. And then I guess I want to end by saying, I think as Mr. Martin alluded to, there is a really robust stakeholder process in here. Appreciate that the legislature is investing in how to make that equitable, have the right voices at the table. We certainly believe a process like this should have the benefit of that. In addition, can't argue with the agency that resources are needed to do this. Would really appreciate to whatever degree the committee can help support the resources that are needed, and really appreciate VHCD building the capacity that they are for this. So that will help. That does meet, part of the goals of ISDIS funding. And certainly really appreciate VHCD's effort to try and make this all happen without too much delay. So I guess with that, I'll just end that, we support the bill and the efforts in the bill. We've offered some modifications. I understand there was a request from you to continue to try and roll up our sleeves and be productive. And I just want to, say that we and VNRC are, of course, interested in helping however we can.
Okay, any questions for Fidel?
You mentioned, thank you. You mentioned that you have some language change suggestions. Where could we find that?
So I did, Jude has them submitted that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and there's trap changes.
Very last page.
There's just two kind of buckets, if you will. It's looking at the natural resource management category, and this is in the definition that links to it,
Oh, I see.
and trying to elevate a little bit more, even though it's in the last sort of recommendation, that we can pay attention to the vision and the goals through this planning process that both are important.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any question for me? Take a quick look and see if things are highlighted in some way.
Yeah, where are they?
Call
it
it
out.
out.
It's like
Is it in a
gray.
different color?
It's in a slightly different color.
Oh, I
Well,
see.
let me
Yeah,
resubmit then with
there's-
that.
Oh, that's hard to.
Let me
Yeah.
resubmit with it highlighted. I thought I had done it with red text last night, but it may have not translated. And when I
Oh,
saved it,
maybe
And
it's
then
not.
if you're changing color of text,
Like every time it's.
for this committee, it's helpful if you use blue rather than red.
Blue, okay, good. Just because I learn something new every day and this
Well,
was,
because not everyone sees colors the same way, so.
okay, that's good to
Blue,
know.
blue works better in this room.
Oh, have we updated Senator McCormick on why we all disappeared this
He
year?
knows.
Okay,
Thank you.
He looks like he's tuning in from a better.
I know, he's
location.
outside still.
Yeah.
Right. All right, thank you, Mr. Fidel. So, with apologies to Ms. Oates, and, but does that sound workable to you? We'll readjust our schedule so that you and Ms. Wilberg and Ms. Wonderful can all testify as a group. That way we'll keep related testimony together, which will be helpful for all of us taking it in. And with that, we should
Yeah.
jump forward to, we'll jump forward to Mr. Larson. So if you can, in the next 10 minutes or
Okay.
so,
Makes sense.
the bill, that will be helpful.
Good morning.
Yes.
Made in Rock Maple, made in Middleborough, Arizona, Vermont Wood Products. I mean, Maple Land.
Brainville,
Maple Land.
Maple Landmarks, yeah, so my guess. I'm Ed Larson. I'm the lobbyist for the Vermont Forest Products Association. Thank you for the opportunity to come before you and speak about H-126 and to testify in the House Committee. And we did work on some changes with the leadership of the House Committee on Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry. And a couple of changes were made that we were appreciative of. But it still doesn't say that we're supportive of the bill. We're trying to be. I kind of been encouraged by the testimony I've been hearing this morning before you. I've seen folks beginning to kind of acknowledge that this may be too aggressive, or there may be other things that should be considered, such as agricultural lands. The working forest aspect is being talked about a little more. So my goal is to try to get us to support these different kinds of conservation efforts and be at the table as we work through the detail. I do represent folks with a lot of resistance, and I need to make it clear what those concerns are. Keep in mind that our industry has been very conservation minded for many generations. We have learned how to be better stewards of the land each and every year as we improve forestry practices, as we understand silviculture, and as we grow into these various occupations. This is kind of changing what conservation is. And so we're a little bit troubled by that, trying to understand what's wrong with what we are doing. For the last 40 years, we've done a lot of work in this area, and we have benefited from that work. And we're trying to understand the real need for something like this to be developed.
Can I ask a quick question on changing the nature of what conservation is? So I just want to make sure I'm really following. There's a back and forth around permanent versus impermanent conservation. Although I'm hearing lots of support for the notion that so far that a toolkit that's bigger than just permanent conservation is a stronger toolkit to have. So is there something you're saying that's missing from that toolkit?
Well, I'm leading into the fact
Or
that
that we're
we are
changing.
seeing that broadening happening. It wasn't so evident in the beginning of this process, this conversation.
Okay.
Permanence does rub a lot of us the wrong way, because the use value appraisal program, current use, there's 2 million acres of forest land in there. And if you compare our current use program to current use programs around the country, ours is very robust. It has a lot of requirements for landowners to be in that program, and it's not that easy to get out. In order to necessarily want to get out, but they need the ability to get out if they have to. And that's the beauty of this program. And that has been, in our mind, real conservation, empowering the landowner to work with experts in the industry, consulting foresters such as myself, to come up with a plan, a long-range sustainable forestry management plan, meeting all the requirements that the state lays out, as well as what USDA has provided us for guidelines. And we've been doing it now for 40 years, and we're seeing good growth there. We're seeing great participation there. But the beauty of it is that landowners have freedom. They have the ability to make choices, and to make changes. So I'm very steadfast, and I've been in this building for 30 years, fighting hard for maintaining a landowner-friendly current use program so that landowners are happy in the program, happy managing their woodlots. My biggest concern now, or our biggest concern now, is just how vital can this industry stay? We're seeing more land come out of production than what you were just learning about as far as land being taken out of forest. So if you were to add the acres that we are losing to development, and there is an argument about where that is. The last numbers I was seeing from the U.S. Forest Service was around 1,700. Now they're saying they're estimating somewhere around 12,000. We don't see it. Anecdotally, we don't see it. We'd be talking about it if we saw that kind of change. But what we are talking about is the 15,000 plus acres that have come into forever wild easements the last couple of years. That's timber base that we lose. We notice that, and it comes fast. So if you add those two together, think of all the land that the industry is losing. And how do we respond to that? Is, well, our industry will right size to the available timber base. That the raw material is what will dictate how our industry will move forward. And loss of timber base, we will then lose businesses. And at some point, there's going to be a point where our industry is no longer vital if it continues along that trajectory. So that's the concerns that I want to make. And so maintaining the availability of encouraging landowners to stay managing their resource base. Now, from an ecological point of view, we think that is very important. When I talk about biodiversity, we can do that. We manage for biodiversity on managed land. In fact, we do a better job of creating biodiversity than what you would get in allowing the forest to just grow unmanaged. And we can make that argument. We also feel that this bill has nothing to do with carbon storage. Managed forests can store carbon very well, and we can sequester it very quickly. And so we're still trying to figure out why we need to change what we're doing as far as creating more permanence and not trying to find ways to keep this industry strong so that we can continue to give good money to landowners for their trees so that they're happy growing them and they're not thinking of all their options. That's kind of the bottom line where we are. Now, we're in the midst of a Vermont Forest Futures Roadmap, and we will get an interim report in June or July. And then we will work from that report to a final report that you will see in January. One of the things I asked the House to do is to acknowledge that and to try to give us an idea of what this will do to impact the future of our industry. We asked that maybe a study be built into this bill. That didn't happen. What I'm asking is let's take a year off. Let's wait for that final report. That way, if you're interested in seeing our industry and what our future, what we envision our future to be, and if you want that to be successful, then let's drive our conservation efforts that works in concert with our desires to succeed, rather than see us in a possible conflict. So I feel this is preempting the process of how do we want the forest products industry to be in the future. And this could antagonize that rather than complement that. So if you wait for that final report, then we can move forward. We have a better conversation. We would know more about what efforts we need to do as an industry, what our recommendations would be to you to help remove some barriers so that we can succeed. Then we can talk about other conservation efforts as well. So I'm looking for slowing this train down, allowing that Forest Futures roadmap process to play out without wondering how efforts in play now will disrupt that or change that. That's kind of what my bottom line is on recommendations to this bill at this time. There are a lot of other things in the bill I would talk about. Sure. But
Do you have any written recommendations?
there is we had four specific recommendations you'll find in my written comments
Okay,
that are on your website.
okay, great. Thank you.
And one of them was actually addressed by the House in the area of the definitions of these three categories. We were looking at them as very hard definitions, not to be changed. And we felt that we should allow time for stakeholders that are be part of this whole process to look at those definitions and to see if they really fit. Could they be changed? Could they be modified? And there is language that's been added that kind of does allow for some flexibility there. And we appreciate that. The Forest Futures Roadmap was not addressed. It was put into the findings, acknowledging that it exists. But it doesn't speak to how this would impact that Forest Futures Roadmap process. And it doesn't speak to how it could interact. And we wanted to interact, but until we have that report, there's no certainty as to whether they will work in concert. The other recommendation is studies. We wanted to know what is the economic impact on our industry with this particular type of a planning focus. And we didn't get that. The answer is, well, those are things that are going to work out throughout this process. Well, okay, but a directive from you or a request for specific information would assure that at least we would all get a chance to see that. So those are the three of the four.
Sure.
And so trying to respect your time. I really could go on and on, but
Yeah, we're gonna have.
and I know I didn't hit everything, but I
Well,
wanted to at least.
so the other thing is, because we will be in markup next week on the bill, if you have, one way to more productively participate in markup is look at, a section of the bill or sections of the bill,
Offer some language.
and do some, editing to it and then label it clearly as you're coming from you. Sometimes we get stuff that people have, it looks like it's from Ledge Council and it's not, and it's hard to difficult to identify sometimes. So any language, if you just make sure that we know exactly who it's from, that'd be great. And then we can look at it when we go to markup next week.
So just so that I can assure you that I'm not trying to behave in the way that Senator McCormick was kind of concerned about coming from our side of the working forest, if you will. But we want to be at the table. We support conservation. We don't like to be overly aggressive with it, like this bill shows, but we want to at least try to be part of solving these issues so that we have a sustainable forest industry long into the future. Try to be helpful,
Thank you
not
for,
as insignificant
thank you
as
for your
we
remarks.
were.
We'll look at your written testimony, and again, if you want to send markup, that would be great. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Larson. Before we adjourn, just a quick note. So just as with the stakeholder groups on anti-DEG, we charged them with doing some work together, come back with consensus language or as close to as you can get. I'm asking Trey Martin to serve as the point person for folks outside the building. The agency will speak on their own, but I hope that you'll be of course in that group, and that maybe your suggestions we'll see how far we get. I'm guessing that we get to something close to consensus, and then we'll see what's already agreed on more clearly next week. And then we can work on the remaining things that are still unresolved, but it will, I'm back to my old expression of painting ourselves out of the room. So I'd ask that people participate and have a draft by noon Monday that comes from that Trey will send in. And if people have further edits to that, fine, of course, but that whatever we see Monday noon will be the basis for the next conversation in the room. And then people can weigh in on it. We'll edit and adopt and move. Ms. Oates, thanks to you and your team for flexibility. You'll be up first when we come back. And I think I'll work with Jude on schedule, but I think that will be your schedule for Wednesday. And on my sheet, but it's not formal yet. Thank you.